Hello and welcome to Relationship Helpers. My name is Vincent and I will be your host along with my wife Laura. We're both counselors and we discuss issues that affect your families. We hope that you enjoy this episode.
I have to admit I'm really unnerved about today's topic. We're discussing sexual harassment, and I understand the reason why I'm unnerved. I woke up in the middle of the night last night thinking about it and was finding it difficult to fall back asleep. And I understand that I felt that way because I was really dredging up some old memories and feelings from things that I have experienced in my high school years and later into adulthood. And these feelings just have gone unprocessed. And the reason they've gone unprocessed is because sexual harassment is something that we don't talk about much. And so what I'm experiencing is a reflection of maybe what some others are experiencing. And I wanted to talk about that today. So today's topic is sexual harassment, but we're going to take the angle of why people that have been sexually harassed do not talk about it. We found recently, this current event stuff here, political figures and figures in Hollywood, they have been alleged to have sexually harassed different folks, and it has become a media heyday. So Vincent and I today are going to talk about sexual harassment and why people do not talk about it.
Right, so this will really be as much for those who maybe haven't been sexually harassed and they're kind of wondering, what is this all about? Why are all these people coming out and talking about it 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years later? Why didn't they talk about it then? Why didn't they do it right after the fact? Why didn't they go to the authorities? Or why didn't they go to human resources at their company? So what's going on? What's the thought process? What is happening with this sexual harassment?
I believe there's many reasons why those that have been sexually harassed do not talk about it. And we're going to go into a number of those things today. And I'm sure that we're probably just grazing the surface on this. But one reason I believe people do not talk about it is because they don't even know they've been sexually harassed. And I'm maybe talking to an older generation when I say this, because I do believe because of the media exposure now, people are getting a better grasp of what sexual harassment is. But with my own experiences, these being well over 20 years ago, the phrase sexual harassment was not used all that often. And I maybe wouldn't have defined it as such back then, but I can look back and know that it was. And that's what I experienced. So why don't people know about sexual harassment or the definition of sexual harassment? I think it's because if we look into history, I think sexual abuse history has a part to play in that. I think secrecy is promoted. Family secrecy has promoted keeping uncomfortable topics covered up.
Right,
Swept
it's
under
not
the
talked
rug.
about.
Right. So I think, from generations past, it's kind of like the ghosts of generations past are keeping these things covered up because for various reasons. I think if a child goes to a parent and tries to express that they've been sexually abused or sexually harassed, if that parent has had that experience, that parent may follow in the footsteps of parents past who have covered it up because they experienced it as well. And it's just kind of the same patterns playing out multi-generationally.
So what we're going to try to do, I think the first one is people really don't know that they've been harassed sexually.
Right.
So we're going to try to, though it's very difficult, to kind of define what this is.
It is. It's kind of like nailing Jell-O to the wall on this one. I think it's all about what that person feels they've experienced. If they call it sexual harassment, then they've been sexually harassed.
Right. So it depends on the relationship. If the relationship is an authority saying that to someone that's sexually objectifying them, talking about their body parts to them. If it is I don't know, an acquaintance or classmate or coworker that there's not a close relationship. They're just, they're acquainted with them. That is sexual harassment. If it's someone, you're walking down the street and someone says something about you, yells it out.
Cat calls.
Yeah, cat calls, whatever. That's sexual harassment.
Right.
If they're talking about you as a sexual object, talking about your sexual body parts, and that being kind of what they're really discussing, nothing about your personality or who you are.
But reducing you to body parts.
Right. Now, some people will say, well, that's flirting, or they may get that confused.
That's using the wrong word to describe a behavior.
Right. So what's happening is this type of what I would times maybe where it's appropriate, this kind of love talk, which may be appropriate between two people that are intimate with each other.
That are consenting in this kind of dialogue.
Right, that are married together. This is an appropriate time to say, hey, I like your whatever sexual body part. I enjoy that. You're able to flirt with each other. But when there's not that relationship, where there's not that trust that's been established between the two, where there's not that intimacy, where this is kind of a relationship that is not that close, the sexual harassment really becomes this kind of forced intimacy on this other person.
That's a great way to define it. Forced intimacy. It's like, we've been told about our personal space, and that when you get within 24 to 18 inches of somebody physically, you're kind of getting inside their bubble. This is when you talk like that, when you are sexually harassing someone, you are getting within their kind of emotional bubble. That's getting them at a psychological level.
The first one that I believe why this happens is people don't know that they've been sexually harassed. It's been okay in their family, in their where they grow up, or who they're around. This has been kind of I hate to say norm, but maybe they haven't realized that's what's happened. They know that they don't feel good when somebody says those things to them, but they're like, this is...
But they've never been taught to speak out about it or encouraged to speak out about it.
Right.
In fact, if they do speak out about it, it ends up being minimalized.
Right, and to a certain degree, I believe the ones who are doing it don't realize it as well. If they're growing up in that environment and watching everybody else doing it, they're like, I've got to do this to be cool or be part of the family. I don't know.
Which is not okay. It's not not okay, but we're just explaining kind of the foundation of why some of this stuff happens.
Right, why this is, and why there's a certain gray area to it, especially when there's a history of this in your family, where you've got grandfather, grandmother, father, mother that are doing these things that are unhealthy.
Right. Which also leads us to sexual abuse history.
Right.
Because I do believe there can be a root in sexual harassment with sexual abuse history in families. We as counselors see how certain patterns emerge in families, and one is secrecy. And so if someone has experienced either molestation, some kind of sexual abuse, or sexual harassment, it's not uncommon for that culture of secrecy in the family to play out by the person that has experienced the sexual abuse or harassment to reach out to another person to try to talk, and then to be shut down in some way or another.
Right. Number 3, the third reason why they may not express it, talk about it, is they don't want to minimize others' experiences.
Yes.
They're comparing theirs to what they're hearing about this other one in the media.
Yes.
I wasn't raped. I wasn't made to take my clothes off in front of the camera type thing. So they're kind of minimizing what actually happened to them, which can be just as damaging, just depending on the circumstances and who it is.
That's right. This Me Too phenomenon that's happened online, this viral phenomenon of Me Too, hashtag Me Too, it's creating a dialogue amongst people. There's a lot of debate, and unfortunately, I think one of the some of the fallout of it is that people that have experienced sexual harassment are feeling justified in not talking about it because they feel like, well, I wasn't raped. They minimize their own experience, but what ends up happening is that prevents them from the opportunity to speak out against something that is bad, something that's happening to people all over the world, because they're measuring it against something else. And I think we should maybe call it apples and oranges here.
Right.
Both are bad.
Right, and it depends on that relationship, which can alter it as well, that relationship of who is doing the sexual harassment to you, which can be, depending on, that also affects the amount of damage, emotional damage to a person, depending on who is the one doing that.
Right, it can be considered a power play. I mean, I look at every example that happened to me. Every situation was a figure that I felt somewhat threatened by, whether it was by size or, what have you, authority figure.
So the third one is they don't want to minimize other people's experiences, and so that's why they don't open up. The fourth one is they have minimized their own experience. So it's happened to them, but they're saying, it wasn't that bad.
Right.
So it's difficult for them to really talk about it because they have put it down in their mind. They're trying to put it away and say, this really didn't happen. Why do you let it bother you? This is just going to stir up trouble. This is going to just cause more problems for you. There's no reason for you to talk about it. It's just going to make it worse.
Yeah, it's a form of denial. And they may even say, well, it's not happening now, so why do I bother?
Right. So this form of denial, many times, that if in their family this had happened with their father, their grandfather, or whoever, aunts, uncles, if this has been happening, they had already learned to deny it because these were people who loved them. They've been doing it to them since they were little kids, saying things about them or treating them that way or treating others that way. For them, bringing it up, they just don't. They had learned to cope with all this negative behavior by what? Denying it. Yes, they would say, this is not that bad. I shouldn't be feeling this way for someone talking about me this way, or whatever it may have been. Yeah, so that's difficult for people to really talk about. The fifth one is, which is very similar, is the fear. The reason why they don't bring it up is they fear re-traumatization. They're afraid they don't want to feel all those feelings again. So they don't talk about it. They keep putting it down. They keep denying it.
That's right. For some people, this may be the scariest thing that they've ever experienced. And when you've experienced something scary, do you want to re-experience it? No, you don't.
No, you don't want to feel the pain again.
No, you don't. So you keep it buried away.
Right. And many of my clients who have had sexual abuse, they don't want to talk about it. That's why they bury it for 30, 40 years. They act like it didn't happen because it's so painful. They do not want to experience that pain again, and they'll do whatever to numb that pain, to not think about it, to start doing other things to get their mind off of it.
Yeah, they come up with a number of unhealthy coping mechanisms to try to alleviate or not have to feel the pain and the fear.
Right. Yeah. So the fifth one is the fear of re-traumatization. The sixth reason why people don't talk about this sexual harassment or don't bring it up is they have a low self-esteem.
They do, and I think we can look at what's going on right now in the media and social media, and really, there's some pretty awful things that are being said to those that have experienced the sexual harassment. I'm trying to be really gentle with how I address those that have experienced sexual harassment, because I think if the word victim can, in its own right, be not well received.
Okay.
Not well received. So, I mean, if you look at what people are saying in social media, you look at Facebook, and you read about those that were dealing with the Bill Cosby case. There were some pretty awful things that were being said about these women. You look at these women that are making allegations against different political figures. More often than not, you're going to find that the supporters of said political figures come back and come out with things like, why didn't you say anything before? They do anything they can to trivialize and minimalize what the victims have experienced, and basically trying to discount them, invalidate them.
Right. So they're putting down the other person's character. So as a result, these people many times will have a low self-esteem, and people with low self-esteems usually communicate in a passive way, meaning they don't talk.
Right, and this goes back to the family secrets thing too, because generally when you have that kind of family behavior system, you're dealing with passive people, secrecy, a very non-confrontational communication style.
Right, very unhealthy communication style.
So you put it on a grand scale and put it out in social media and the media, and it's a really scary thing.
Right, yeah. I mean, of course, they want to go back and just hide like they had been doing. They tell themselves that you knew this would happen. Why did you go and tell about this? You knew people would jump on you. This was the wrong thing to do, and now they're even kind of...
That's why I want to encourage the listeners today to try, even if you've not experienced sexual harassment or sexual abuse, or maybe you have and you're still saying these things about other people.
Right.
I just want to encourage you to consider your words and your actions and your behavior and what you're saying and how you're responding to these people through social media or just talking to people, that what you're saying could be somewhat traumatizing to a person.
Right. So let's go to number 7. This is the 7th reason why people haven't talked about it, why they haven't brought it out, why it's been so many years before they've talked about it. And so number 7 is maybe they have told other people. So they've told others, but the others downplayed their experience when they tried to tell them. So maybe they did try to tell somebody long ago, and when they did, that other person didn't listen. They minimized it, or they said, that's not true, you're making up, you're a liar.
I think it's a spectrum here, because I think if you're having difficulty communicating to the person what you experienced, then it may come across to the person that you're talking to like what happened is shady or unclear, and so they may not have a good grasp of what happened. I know that was my experience in high school, trying to tell an authority figure that somebody had said something to me that was inappropriate, and I did not clearly communicate. And this may sound like I'm victim blaming, and I don't want to victim blame here. I think that universally we need to get a better grasp of how to understand other people, to listen to other people, and to empathize with other people.
So then the next one, another way, a reason why people don't bring it up, and this is when they're adults, is number 8, the threat of a job loss. So if this is in a work situation, of course, they don't say anything about it if the boss says that or someone else who is an important team member or important employee says it. They don't mention it because they're afraid of losing their job, financial reasons.
Imagine a single mother that's trying to make ends meet, and her male boss is sexually harassing her, and she just is trying to keep meals on the table and the power connected. These kind of threats, and she probably feels terrible what's being said about her or what actions are taken against her physically or whatever, and she feels her livelihood and for her family feels threatened.
Right. Well, and I think about, I don't know why my mind goes to the movie 9 to 5. I know it was made, that was made, 30 some years ago. But it's all about sexual harassment. The boss sexually harassed all the women. Mm-hmm. That was his character. And they were fed up and tired of it. They were planning and scheming against him. But they didn't ever say anything face-to-face to him or talk to the bosses about him. Or if they did, it was
to HR or anything
or HR
like that,
or anyone ahead, because it would they would lose their job, and they needed their job. And I think this brings up, especially that movie, I'm thinking it brings up the 9th reason why people wouldn't want to mention it or talk about it, and that is reputation. In there, the character of, I think Dolly Parton's character didn't want to mention any of that because of her reputation. She didn't want to hurt her reputation with the other ladies there, with everyone else. And so they kept quiet.
And a lot of that reputation stuff really ties into self-esteem.
Right. Right. So they didn't really want to open up and confront the other person because they didn't feel like they were worthy enough to do that. And they felt like if they did do that, then their reputation would be even less.
Well, and there's also the shame component of it. Those that have been sexually harassed, sexually abused, they feel shame. They feel dirty or less than, even though it's not their fault.
Right. So, this sexual harassment, and I'll go into the other realm of the sexual abuse, the sexual abuse or molestation that maybe happened at younger ages. It is common. It's common in my practice to have adults not tell anyone for years. They may have been sexually molested as a child, whether they're 8, 9, 10, maybe as a teenager, maybe younger. They may have mentioned it to someone somewhat, but many times they didn't mention it. I'll have ones that, especially men, that didn't mention it to anyone until about 30, 40 years later, and they're telling me in a counseling session.
So it's kind of like that culture of secrecy that allows the sexual abuse to take place also allows the secrecy to take place. So the oversights that are made in parenting in terms of good communication, being able to talk to your child about what's appropriate and inappropriate touch, appropriate and inappropriate conversation, these things that fall through the cracks, these conversations are also what allows for those inappropriate behaviors to take place. Also, in the future, allow for the secrecy to take place as well.
Right. So this clear communication to children and to young adults about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate is key to having healthy relationships in the workplace, in the school place, family.
And further, to make yourself approachable. What I mean by that is if you're a parent or an authority figure, make yourself the person that people feel comfortable to come to talk about these things. If you're a mother, you want to be able to discuss these things with your child on an age-appropriate level and in a way that child is going to feel like if somebody comes up to them on the playground or at school and does something inappropriate, that child is going to feel comfortable coming to you to talk about that.
I want to wrap things up by going back over the 9 different ways or reasons why people may keep quiet and not talk about this. Are, number 1, they don't know they've been harassed. They don't know about it. They're ignorant about what sexual harassment is. Number 2, they have a sexual abuse history. Number 3, they don't want to minimize others' experiences. Number 4, they've minimized their own experience. Number 5, fear of re-traumatization. They're afraid of feeling that pain again. Number 6, they have a low self-esteem. So people with low self-esteem, what do? Many times they don't talk. Number 7, others have downplayed their experience when they try to tell. They've tried to tell others before, but they didn't listen. Number 8, there's a threat of job loss. They're afraid of losing their financial means, so they don't say anything in the workplace. Number 9, reputation. They're afraid of damaging their reputation, of having others to say negative things about them, to see them in this, maybe, as Laura said, victim light, and they don't want that. They don't want all that attention.
I'm hoping with today's podcast that we can help to better inform people about sexual harassment and sexual abuse and get to the point where no one can use the excuse of ignorance any longer, that people are informed, they understand what sexual harassment is.
Thank you for listening today.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.